Well, welcome to As in Heaven Season 3. My name's Jim Davis. I am your host and pastor of Orlando Grace Church, and I am joined by my co-host and old friend, Skyler Flowers, who serves as the assistant pastor at Grace Bible Church in Oxford, a church I know and love very well, where he does college and youth ministry. And on a personal note, it's just fun to do a podcast together on college and the church with Skyler, because I've known Skyler since he was a freshman in college. And I was his pastor, and we've had the privilege to be able to, my wife and me, to see the Lord work in Skyler's life there in seminary down here in Orlando and beyond. And today we have the privilege of being joined by Derek Rishmawy. Derek is a campus minister with Reformed University Fellowship, also known as RUF, at the University of California, Irvine. He hosts his own podcast on the Mere Orthodoxy podcast network called Mere Fidelity, and is a PhD student at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and he is also a fellow at the newly created Tim Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. Derek, thank you for joining us today for this episode to talk about the college years and de-churching.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, this season, we have been talking about living in a new context in the U.S. called the Great De-churching, as roughly 40 million people who used to regularly attend church do not anymore, which is changing so much about both the church and the fabric of our society. I'm particularly passionate about today's episode, as I spent 10 years of my life in college ministry, and it has been well documented and is supported by our research that the majority of people who de-church will do so in the transition out of the home and into whatever's next for them. So for those who enter college after they leave home, they step into a world of new ideas, new anxieties, new pressures that can often render faith at best a luxury that they don't have time for, or at worst, an outdated mode of thinking that just doesn't work for them in the modern world. Nevertheless, studies show that the majority of college students say one of their top priorities is to put together a coherent worldview in their college studies. Bethany Jenkins, I think, summarizes it pretty well in her chapter about engaging college students today in her book, Reformed Public Theology, and she writes, two things are happening at once. College students are increasingly longing to explore questions of ultimate meaning and purpose, and college campuses are increasingly unwilling, unable, or unsure of how to cultivate those conversations in their classrooms. But what's so interesting to me about our data, and others like Ryan Burge, who've done great work here, is that studies show that the more education a Christian has, actually, the more likely they are to continue in their faith. So higher education isn't necessarily the boogeyman that it's made out to be. We've also seen that college students who are involved in both a college ministry and a church during their college years are three times more likely to continue in their faith. Now, admittedly, there is some self-selection bias, because those who are more likely to continue in their faith are more likely to opt into both church and campus ministry, but it is a key indicator nonetheless. All right, so we're going to circle back to that data in just a little bit, but my first question is just about your story. What was it that drew you to the university campus and serving in college ministry? You know, so many people see college as a short period in your life that you do for 4 or 5 years, and then you move on. So what is it that keeps you, Derek, coming back to the university campus as a place where you see God keeping you to serve?
More degrees. No, I got left and I went back. So it was actually very formative for me as well in my walk with Christ. I was raised in a Christian home, and that's true. And I can't remember a time I didn't believe in Jesus, but when I was a freshman at UC Irvine, actually, I'd been going through a dark period with God, kind of a dry period with God, and God kind of lit me up in a sense, had a personal revival of faith in Christ. And this happened through a couple of ministries, and one was a very good local church and some powerful preaching. I started reading my Bible every day, praying every day, and I got really passionate about engaging my fellow students. I'd always had a little bit of an evangelistic bug, but that just transformed. And within a few months, I was discerning a call to ministry because of what happened in those transformative months. And so for the rest of college, I switched major from poli-sci. I wanted to be a lawyer, switched to philosophy to prep for ministry, and then started really plugging into local church ministries. And then later, but I didn't know what that was going to look like, down the road. Later, when I started my master's, my seminary years, I'd been working with this group of high school guys actually, and they working my old youth group, doing some teaching, small group leading, that sort of thing. And these guys I loved them, and they were kind of a funny, quirky group of guys. But around their freshman year, they started to disperse, and I after a few months, I was still living at home. I was like, I don't know where these guys are going. I don't know what's going on. So I started having them over to my parents' house every Saturday morning to eat Costco muffins, which are superior to almost all other muffins, and drink some coffee and talk about, a chapter out of Tim Keller's Reason for God. This was back in 2000, I don't know, 7 or 8 or whenever. I can't remember when this was going on, or maybe it might have been earlier. And we're just going through that and realizing the questions that these guys had. It was partially a factor of the questions that they had, as well as the stage itself and how important it had been for me at that age. I started thinking, as I was doing more classes and coursework and seminary, that it started to plant the idea that, working with college students would be kind of ideal, is because it is that age where students still ask meaningful questions, and I don't know, your frontal lobe your cortex is developed enough to actually do a lot of the high level. I mean, these kids I say kids, they're students, they're adults, they're smart, right? They're extremely intelligent and able to ask and answer questions in really developed ways that make me think a lot. And so it just seemed like a great place to have conversations with people before life has, in a sense, frozen you into the same rhythms, the same patterns, the same default answers you had accepted. That the cement is still wet in college in some important ways, and I thought that's kind of where I want to go for a while, at least, to have these conversations, and maybe I'm maybe a little still too young to be pastoring. People with kids my own age and that sort of thing. So there was a few things driving it, but essentially my own story, what I saw, a lack of opportunities for some of the students that I cared about deeply, and then my interest in those questions always just kind of gave me resonance with college ministry, working with college students.
Yeah, that's great. I don't think that Costco biscuits played quite as much of a role in my experience in college ministry, but not no role at all. Biscuits, I think breakfasts are still quite the place to meet with college students and to discuss these ideas. But I like the way that you had kind of mentioned that one of the things that makes college ministry such a compelling place for ministry is that, like you said, that cement is still wet, but the problem is that once they leave college, like you said, there becomes way less time as you're dealing with career, possibly getting into family, all of these things. There becomes way less time to, in some ways, meditate on these big questions of life and meaning, and so you can kind of get locked into whatever those ideas were that you developed as a 21-year-old, or you developed because there was some really big pressure on you to do so, and you said, okay, well, that's an easier mindset to kind of adopt. And I'm super thankful for the churches and ministries that I was involved with in college, because like you said, they didn't treat, I think one of the things that drew me to Grace Bible Church, which is the church I currently work at, and it's in Oxford, Mississippi. Jim said just Oxford earlier. And so sometimes people hear Oxford and they're like, wow, he's in Oxford, England. And I'm like, no, Oxford, Mississippi. Yeah, it does sound fancier. It makes me sound a lot smarter. But one of the things that drew me in was that they were not treating me as an unserious thinker, as an unserious disciple. They were actually actively engaging with the things that we were experiencing on campus and engaging with in campus and culture. And I'm not that far out of college, but when I interact with college students today, it seems to me that they're busier than ever. They feel an immense pressure that was present when I was in college, but it's never not been present. But it seems it's tenfold even now to be involved. And not only that, but this pressure to champion every secular cause. Like, you can't just be a passive, soldier, and you have to be either a member of the resistance or you have to be a champion at the front lines. that it puts in, these causes that it puts in front of them. And so they're constantly wrestling with who do they want to be with their careers and their bodies and more. And so I just wanted to ask you from your perspective of engaging on the front lines with students right now, do you see that as being the case? I'm in Mississippi, but you're out in California, as being the case even out there. And then also, what are some of those main felt needs and interests and ideas that you see college students really wrestling with today?
So I work with students at UC Irvine, and it's a top whatever research university in the UC system, and it's climbing the rankings. These are all really intense, high achiever students. So I'm working with a small, I'm not saying unique subset, but I'm just kind of bracketing my expertise, or if you can call it that. These students are very driven. They're very motivated to have very full schedules, very full lives. They're the students who had extracurricular upon extracurricular in undergrad in order to make sure that they could get to the university, and then they keep that drive going in order to get to the internships. And so we're going to join this association and have this club and then have this social activity and so on and so forth. Now, that's not every student. There's a lot of students who've got some open schedules that are filled with, I don't know, what's the game? World of Warcraft is old. It's the one overnight.
Fortnite.
Fortnite, Fortnite stuff like and more complicated games than that. But so there's some of that too. But there's a lot of there's just a lot of high achieving, a lot of high pressure, thinking about the next thing. And so there are students who are definitely really concerned with all the social causes, all that, and at least at the level of kind of needing to seem like they care about those things. I mean, there's a lot of students who are just, yeah, I care, I totally care. And they're just kind of putting up a little flag of whatever in order to kind of just, hey, please leave me alone. Let me, but then there's kids who really do care. But then I think a lot of it is really the drive to succeed. The drive to succeed is massive. The drive to, and succeed, by that I mean financial stability and success and kind of a place to go next. I mean, the idea, some of them have such a crushing weight on their souls that if they don't have a job right after college, like, oh my gosh, my whole, so often I have these kind of talking students down a bit, recognizing like, look, if you don't get your career job within 3 months, 6 months, a year, realize that only puts you at 23 when you're starting your career. But the pressure of recognizing that is, it's immense because their whole life, I mean, there was a stat that came out, the Pew study, parents in America, I think about 90-something% of them said that it is extremely important for their children to get a career or a job that is financially securing their livelihood, as opposed to about 20-something% who said it was similarly extremely important for their children to get married or have children. This is, I mean, having a career is great and being financially solvent and whatever. Absolutely, I'm not minimizing that. But in terms of the relative weight that parental pressure is exerting on these students, whether that's a verbal thing or just an assumed value within the home. And so I think Zoomers are even less, idealistic. And so there's a lot of idealism. Every college kid is to some degree an idealist, but less than like the millennials who are, I'm going to go out and join some nonprofit, yada, yada. Like you have way more Zoomer guys who are like, that's cool, but I need to generate 2 or 3 extra streams of revenue, and I'm selling this thing, and I got this Bitcoin going, like, and stuff that never would have occurred to me. Partially because I was a philosophy major, but like even my business buddies they're just steps ahead of just really making it, grinding and that sort of thing. And so that the pressure to get that going is there, even among the set of students at UCI who are also oftentimes existentially and conceptually engaged with trying to form that coherent life view. All of that's there. So yeah.
Just a little bit different than my experience at Florida State, also known as the Princeton of the Panhandle. So, all right, but I do want to, this is really helpful to understand exactly what are the intellectual, emotional, and professional pressures that students are wrestling with today on college campuses. In light of that, why, and maybe other aspects, why do you think that it is that for so many students of faith that the university seems to be a place of no return?
I mean, there's a lot of answers there. One is, I think, I've had this long-standing theory that a lot of people are always worried, hey, kids, so many students lose their faith in college. And I just think what you've had is a shift in social pressure. Like the atmosphere's changed, the air pressure's changed. Hey, we've reached 20,000 feet, and your ears pop because it's a different kind of pressure that's being exerted. You're not going to church because that's one of the main social events that all your friends are at. Your parents are driving you there every Sunday and that sort of thing. You're on campus. Nobody's going to know if you don't go to church for 8 months or whatever it is. So you got stuff to do and you're tired and you're exhausted. I'm going to sleep. I think there's a lot of students who are not actually Christian who go to college and realize I'm not actually Christian. They were verbally they'd say, oh yeah, that's what I am. Their default. It's not actually, but weren't actually regenerate believers. And I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that there's a lot of that happens. So there's a lot of angst around like, oh my gosh, people are falling away. I'm a Calvinist, so I don't think a lot of that is actually apostasy from like true regenerate faith anyways. But I just think we would recognize that the social pressure is different. The incentives are different. And that's fine. I'm not, so I think that's a big part. The other part is, there are students who are believers. They do love Jesus, but again, you can see that at work in their lives as well. The pressure shift creates a sort of disequilibrium where you have to regain your feet again and learn to do things for yourself, find church for yourself. That I think is there, and you have that kind of. That's why the first couple of quarters or semesters in college, oftentimes grades slip too. Like, oh, I don't have to get up at a certain time. Mom's not telling me to do this. Mom's not telling me to do that, or whatever it is. And so you have to regain that. But when you're in college, college is your job. So you have to figure out how to do that. Whereas church, you're not getting paid. It's not your job in the sense. And so the same pressure to like find your feet again isn't as intense. And so you have a bunch of people, I think, who aren't actually Christians who just realize, oh, I'm not a Christian. And then you have students who are, but who there's less social pressure to help them get on their feet again that is driving that. And then I think that there are other pressures at work, especially with kind of student age populations of people who aren't going to college that probably need to be explored when it comes to economic pressures. And I think there's a meaning deficit that nobody's actively engaging those students in that way consciously. And so they're often ignored and left out, and there's no good on ramp. There's no good ramp from student, where everything's highly programmed in a youth ministry or something, to adult who is not a college student but is now part of the. So I think oftentimes there's a drop off there where students get left and not seen.
Well, the first part of your answer reminds me of my college orientation. It was a group, and some parent asked, hey, what can we do to set our children up for success, make sure they succeed during these years? And the guy up front said, well, if you hadn't done it by now, it's not. So it's just like thinking, and we're going to circle back to, what happens in the home leading up to that. But it makes a lot of sense. You're not just because students are coming in professing to be a Christian doesn't mean that they really are. And connected to that question, it's easy for colleges and universities to be seen as some large societal boogeyman that's looking to consume Christians and spit out their bones. And there are lots of movies that fuel this sort of idea. And it's led some to even begin to argue that young Christians should avoid secular universities altogether. But as I mentioned earlier, our research, along with some other great work done by many other people, Ryan Burge included, has shown pretty conclusively that the more education a Christian has, the more likely they are actually to continue in their faith. For me, college was the place where I actually found my faith. So my question is, what are the unique opportunities that college presents as it pertains to the Christian faith?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is, I think, something I have seen. One of which is just time. It is, universities have become degree granting institutions whose main job is to allow you to enter the workforce that has started to require a college degree for basically any job. So there's something where they've backed away from the big questions that universities used to tackle of, like, what does it mean to be a fully human person, and kind of like a baseline humanities degree, a humanizing degree. So there's that. But even still, students still there is this baseline instinct of recognizing this is time set apart to study, to think. And they also just do have more time. As high stress, as high, highly programmed as so many of them are, there is still an awareness that a lot of this is chosen and a lot of this is optional, and that some of it is social in a way that, like, they're not going to get this time back. And so there is a greater degree of flexibility and a greater openness to asking some of these questions. Universities still do have some of that idea of, like, I'm coming here to, like, think about life to some degree. And if it's not on the student's radar yet, it's the kind of thing that you can say, like, hey, you're in college. This is the time to, like, think about big questions. This is one of the things I often try to do. Talk to, especially young folks, talking about the question of meaning. If I grab coffee with a guy, I'm just kind of ask, hey, I know what you're doing. You're doing all this stuff, right? You got all the do you have any idea why you're doing it? Right? Why? And then you start asking the why question, and I think a bunch of people, their eyes light up, and you realize, oh, yeah, why? And that opens up doors where, again, when you're out of that, when you're in the kind of the normal workaday realities of life after college, why is foreclosed for the next what? The next what is what matters. Like, what do I do for this? And so there's, not only is the cement wet, the wind isn't blowing as hard to dry it. In that sense, there's enough moisture in the air, so to speak, that it's keeping it wet longer. And so those questions of meaning are an open door in ways that often they're not when you are abstracted from, or you are kind of forced into the realities of the world in the way that you're not when you're actually in college. So I think that's one of the major unique opportunity. The other thing is just socialization, or the opportunity to socialize in mass groups. There's not a lot. I mean, UCI students, they have clubs where these students learn mass dances, and they dedicate 3 days a week for an hour and a half to, like, learn this mass dance that they perform one, and it's great. It's awesome. When are you ever going to do that? Who does that anymore? But they do, right? That's the kind of thing you can do. And it's like, oh, well, if I do that thing, I can go to this thing and talk to that one guy about Jesus or whatever. It's thinkable. It's thinkable in a way that it's often not in other stages of life. So, there's an openness. Openness is the biggest thing. Openness of time, openness of schedule, openness of mentality, of just mental space, and receptivity.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that I see here at the University of Mississippi that I think surprises people. Like, I grew up in a small town. It was, like, very much viewed, oh man, if you go to the university that's not just down the road, or it's not very small, then you are really opening yourself up to some dangers. But I think the thing that surprises me more than anything a lot of times is that students are way less allergic to discussing faith, to discussing Christianity, to just discussing, like you said, that why question than people think. And I think that that's the thing people miss out on. And, there's some great reasons to go to Christian universities to go to smaller universities. But one of the benefits that I've seen at secular universities is that there is this openness to say, I am actually coming here, and I do want to, as statistics showed that we mentioned in the introduction, that I'm actually open to building a coherent worldview. And I the main thing I'm looking for is not, okay, I'm here to be indoctrinated in secularism so that I can just move on with the social causes of the day. In fact, I actually feel like most students are coming saying, I just want to know that if I believe one thing, that it's going to lead to a coherent worldview, a coherent system from which I'm able to interpret all of reality, that it seems to fit together. And I personally believe that that is exactly what the gospel offers. And that's why it does feel that it is something that is very compelling. But that doesn't change the fact that on these college campuses, this is, the gospel and Christian movements is one current amongst many currents that are pulling and drawing them into different ideas and different clubs and fighting for their times. And, we mentioned, when Jim was in college so long ago, and, even when I was in college not as long ago, there was more of a social aspect to being a Christian that isn't as present anymore. Like, when I was a college student, one of the places you could say, I don't know anyone at the University of Mississippi, I want to go meet people. There was 3 different campus ministries that had large group gatherings. You could say, okay, I'm going to do that. And those ministries still exist. There's just not as much of a compelling, like, oh, that's where I can go get my socialization, because there are all these other organizations. But that's time, that's ideas, that's all these other factors, like you had mentioned, that are even societally. But because the mind is so malleable, even in this time, I just want to ask, in your ministry, what are some of the points of teaching or discipleship that you find yourself returning to year after year because of the way they seem to resonate with students? And I think I've followed your ministry some, via social media, and I think sometimes that's even surprising, like walking through a confession of faith that people might say, students don't want confessions of faith. But what are some of those points of discipleship that you find yourself, year after year, I return to this and I find it compelling for students?
Yeah. Just to touch on something before that, one of the things that's interesting about the university context and kind of a postmodern context and post-Christendom context is the fact that because for so many students, the church they don't have a church background. They actually don't have it. It's not, hey, secularism or Christianity. It's almost this full-blown pluralism of like, oh, hey, you guys are one more weird group on campus that deserves to exist along a bunch of other ones. And so you get a hearing that way, because it's just, oh, okay, that's fine. So there's a weird, it's more hostile and less hostile in a lot of different ways. But with that, the themes that I've kind of come back to, one of the big ones is it's just the meaning one. Meaning, does your life have a big purpose? I already kind of broached it with the why and the big why versus all the little whys, and which of those is sustaining, right? You're doing things for money, you're doing things for family, for good things. A lot of people are driven by a need to provide for their family in the future or back home. And I have a lot of students who from non-Western backgrounds who the things that are driving them are the values driving them are a little different. And so, but the question is, okay, but what happens if you fail at that? Or what happens if you succeed at that really early? And then what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Like, what is the big why? What hope do you have? What's it all driving towards? I mean, kind of the powerful, there's kind of a powerful, crossover if you're able to blend essentially Ecclesiastes 1 and Westminster Shorter Catechism 1. What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. And that's a big meaning. That's a big why that can gather together all the other little whys, and all the other little whys, all the other little whats that you're doing in a coherent narrative, a coherent story. I was talking to a student the other day. I was talking about this, had the same conversation, and she pointed out, without a big, it's like, I have a bunch of little chapters, little stories, but if they're not in one big book, then they're not going anywhere. I didn't generate that. She did. And so students coming to the point of giving them a big overarching meaning in a way that draws everything together, work, family, like justice, all of that, because none of the other things fully can, right? All of the other things will kind of leave you. either empty or high and dry or burned out, or potentially the whole house of cards comes falling down. So meaning's one of the biggest overall one that is kind of an umbrella that allows me to speak to a bunch of different things. And just, so RUF, just to kind of give people a little bit like under the hood, we do come back to two or three different main themes, principles that we talk about regularly is justification, sanctification, and scripture. Questions of, like, who are you? Are you who God declares you to be? How do you grow into what you're supposed to be? How do you change? How do you stop being the same person who you've been and you're kind of sick of? There's this great news of sanctification that Christ works. And then where do you find truth? Where do you find all the information about this? How do you kind of come to understand the whole world? Well, scripture, and those themes, I think, do again connect up to that big meaning theme of like, where do you find your meaning? Where do you find your justification? Where do you find the drive to go forward? Where do you find the hope to go forward? And where do you find the truth that kind of unifies that and shows you how to put all of this stuff together, your personal, individual meaning, and then the meaning of the whole world, and the meaning of the causes that you care about, and the meaning of honoring mother and father, all that. Oh, so scripture. Scripture. And the reason is because, that points to Jesus, and Jesus ties it all together. So those are a few things that I keep coming back to. So yeah.
Good. No, it's really good. And it's funny, as we're talking, I'm realizing how my stage of life has shifted because, I used to think about college ministry in terms of the college students I was ministering to. Now that I have two teenagers, I'm thinking of my own kids. And we have this almost defeatist mentality of like, how can my kids get through college and just retain what they had in their home? And instead of thinking like, how can they grow? How can that be a great blessing to them? And one really interesting thing that I have not heard talked much about, but I have a number of friends, close friends, who are seminary professors, and they may not say this a lot publicly, but there is this understanding in multiple seminaries, I've heard it in multiple places, that some of their best students, and more often than not, their best students and the students that go on to be very effective pastors or whatever else they want to do with their degree, are the ones who went to secular public institutions, because they have had to engage in the real world and they've been challenged, and then they've been equipped by people like you. So it's not just, how does my kid maintain their faith through college? Really, the university is spitting out some of the best Christian leaders, and our seminaries are affirming that.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. And like I said before, there's so many good reasons. And I think Christian colleges seek to do that effectively as well in the different ways they do it. Yeah. And of course, but I mean to say,
thanks for the caveats. You're right.
No, but I wanted to say that our conversation today is really centering on why the secular university is such a big place. And I think what you've raised here and talking about also about Christian, there's so many things that we haven't talked. This conversation's been so good. There's so many things we haven't talked about that would be, I think, such powerful things to talk about, like suffering on the college campus and what that speaks about meaning and loneliness on the college campus and how that connects. And not only that, we haven't talked much about international students and there's just so many different avenues. Maybe there's a whole other podcast or season that's just focusing on these topics. But I think the way that you were talking about it, Derek, really resonates a lot with what the Keller Center is trying to do in connecting these cultural apologetics and saying, the apologetics that people are looking for today are things like the problem of evil. There's no question about it. People still wrestle with that. But there's a reason why when Tim Keller wrote The Reason for God, he also wrote Making Sense of God Next, because he found that meaning question is so big. And this has all been so helpful, but we're running out of time. So I briefly want to turn and just focus on the church itself. And we had mentioned at the top of the episode, the statistics that or Jim had mentioned the data that the college students who are involved in both a college ministry and church being 3 times more likely to continue in their faith. And that's pretty staggering. And so I want to ask, not just simply the college environment and college ministries and discipleship, but also what can churches and college towns and campus ministries do to be more effective in this crucial season in students' lives? And that can involve preaching with students in mind, discipleship, or integration in church life. But I just want to ask you, what are some of the ways that you see churches in these places moving into these spaces in ways that are helpful and effective with the gospel?
I think you named a bunch of them. One of which is, I think actually churches that have have an eye on preaching at the students who show up is big. So you see them, pastors who are willing to meet with them, engage with them, families that are willing to open their homes to them, seeing them as a resource to be invested in and shepherded. Oftentimes a lot of churches sell themselves short, or they kind of think short term into like, we're going to invest in our families, which you absolutely have to invest in the people who are going to be there long-term disciple, long-term shepherd, catechize your children, all that massively important. Actually, that one's just forward looking to the college students. Catechize your babies after you baptize them. Had to do the plug.
Now, wait, I'm sorry. Do you wait until they can understand before you catechize them?
Does the Lord like wait until we fully understood before he regenerates us? No, this
is turning into an episode on baptism.
It is. It's always about immersion into the life of Christ and the grace of God.
You go.
But I think partnering with trusted campus ministries, like getting to know local campus, there's a lot of great ones. If you've got a local RUF, support them. They're doing good work, and they're actually aiming students at churches. That's part of the idea. But fostering relationships with people who are already on campus, and if you've got the resources, if you are a big enough church, actually doing specific outreach to connect to the campus. There's a lot of good churches that, UCI is a 30,000 person institution. I can't cover that. No, a bunch of the university ministries can't. We actually need the churches to be proactively engaged in that way. Local churches doing that. But I do think having strong relationships and just thinking and actively praying for the universities, seeing that as a mission field in and of itself that's worth the time. I do think praying without necessarily knowing what your next step is, but knowing that they're there as a resource, as a mission field. You mentioned earlier a mission field that actually often gives you access to the nations, because the nations are coming to you. A mission field where there are students who are hungry and alone, sometimes physically hungry, lonely, and in need of the very thing that the church is great at. Or can be great at, which is a community based around grace, the grace of Jesus. And so those are some of the things that I would say is honestly just being aware is the biggest first step, and consciously wanting the Lord to open doors for you. You'd be surprised at what happens.
So good. Yeah, that's so good. I think, and Jim, I'd love to hear from you from doing college ministry too, just some of the ways you've seen the church effectively partner with college students. But I think one of the things that I've been seeing recently is even the crew ministry here at the University of Mississippi. One of the things they've done so well, and they've seen a lot of students that maybe normally wouldn't have frequented the door of a college ministry, is just hospitality, like just being hospitable and opening up your home and feeding people has been so huge. But also in other ministries that we've seen, and we have a lot of great ministries at the University of Mississippi. We've been blessed. We're in the Deep South. It helps like CO and Young Life has been we've really seen them grow even in our church, and the Baptist Student Union. There's so many more, but is also seeing them just partnering with these ministries that just are on the front lines, that go places that, for instance, I as one pastor can only go so far, and I can only be involved on the front line so far, and to see some of these ministries go into fraternities and sororities, to go into places that most people would look at and say, that's as dark as it gets. You can't go in there. And to see them come out with disciples and seeing people baptized and come to turn to know the faith. So those are some of the ways that I've seen. And I really think truly just hospitality is one that can be seems so, come on, hospitality, but really just brings home so much, shows them love, brings them in. And like you said, feeding physically really does. I mean, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, right? He came eating and drinking as a statement of method. He was sitting down and eating with people. And so that was effective for me as a college student too, because I was constantly hungry. And so Jim, I'd love to hear if there's any.
I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is just having a kingdom mindset and working together, and not a tribal mindset. So I've been on both. I was on staff with Campus Crusade for 10 years. have dear RUF friends from Brian Sorgenfry, Les Newsom, people that there was a deep sense that as campus ministries, we were on the same team. And then, but then on the church side too, just really as a campus minister, early in my years, I don't know that I had the value for the church that God grew me into later on. And I was very blessed as a campus minister, having a high value of the role of the church in the community, and not as earlier on I might have thought, well, they do their thing, we do ours, and that's not the case. And then again, later as a pastor in Oxford, Mississippi, just having so many campus ministers who are deeply committed to the local church. And so you see all kinds of collaboration and corroboration. It's just a super sweet thing. We're not in a necessarily a college town now in Orlando, although we have UCF, and I think it's the largest undergrad in the nation now. But we do host campus outreach, summer projects, and still stay involved. And it's just such a blessing to the church to have those ministries around us.
And I've been on both sides. I was the local campus. I was a local college guy at a church for 4 or 5 years before the graduate degree, and so I've been on both ends, and it really does matter when both sides are aware. When campus ministries are aware of their role as in a sense servants of the church, arms of the church, pointing to the church, and the church is aware of them and just seeing them as like, hey, hands and feet, going, reaching, not in competition, but in close partnership. That is when it is healthiest and most long-term, aimed at creating not just good members of our campus ministry for a few years, but good members of churches for a lifetime. And that's the goal. And you don't care how big my thing is for a few years if our students are actually in healthy churches on the other end of it. That's the goal. So, yeah.
Well, I can't think of a better place to land the plane. Derek, I really appreciate your work you're doing, and I commend your podcast, Mere Fidelity, to everyone listening. And everyone listening, join us next week for our next episode, where we're going to interview Ben Cant. We are going to shift away from engaging upcoming generations in children's, youth, and college ministries and consider what it looks like for the church to care for the whole person, specifically in the area of mental health.